Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Mandy Magura and I'm with the Alaska Wildlife Alliance. We are happy to have everyone tonight at another installment of our Wildlife Wednesday presentation. But before we get into it, next slide, please. I want to just give a couple quick virtual engagement guidelines. You may notice that when you joined, both your audio and your video were turned off, and that is so we can avoid any potential Zoom bombing. We don't want any additional distractions to our presenters either. And most importantly, though, we do have folks all around the state of Alaska with limited bandwidth and so and viewing capabilities. And we do believe there's a video in this presentation. So we do ask that you keep these turned off to allow for better streaming for everybody. We also do encourage you to, oops, not yet, to view the program in full screen mode. And if you don't know how to do that, look for like the little picture frame symbol and you can click that and it'll change your view. And so you can, full screen allows you to see more of it throughout the presentation and see some of the details on the slides. And then we are going to ask you to hold all questions until the end of the presentation to give our speakers a chance to go through everything. But feel free to go ahead and as we're going along, put your questions in the chat box and then we will address them at the end of the presentation. And most importantly, we do hope that you have fun tonight, you enjoy, and you learn something new. Next slide. I do want to give you just a quick overview of what the Alaska Wildlife Alliance is. We are an Alaska-based nonprofit, and we were formed in 1978, and we protect Alaska's wildlife through citizen mobilization, advocacy, and education. And we really advocate for healthy ecosystems that are both scientifically and ethically managed to protect our wildlife for present and future generations. And so if you go to our website, akwildlife.org, this is a screen that you'll be greeted with. So next slide. Just briefly kind of about us, we have three main programs. We have our Voices for Wildlife program. That's our advocacy branch. And that's where we mobilize people around the state of Alaska to participate in management decisions that affect our wildlife at the local, state, and federal level. Our Wildlife Wednesday that we're having tonight is part of our education and outreach program. And we like to educate the communities on various wildlife issues around the state. And that allows folks to not only enjoy wildlife better, but also to help protect them. And in addition to our Wildlife Wednesdays, we have citizen science projects and various events. And then finally, our third main program is our conservation coalitions. We know that protecting Alaska's wildlife is a big job and that we're stronger together. So in addition to working with ourselves and our members, we also partner with other conservation nonprofits, small businesses from tourism industry, and even hunters when we can come together on and build a coalition to support wildlife needs across the state. Next slide. And I don't expect you to be able to read all this, but I just wanted to give you a snapshot. If you go back to our website, this is just what you'll see in our latest news feed. And some of the things that you'll see is we have Wildlife Wednesday videos that we've recorded and posted. So if you miss something, you can go and check them out. We share information. The one on the bottom left is an action alert. And these are ways that we let you know of how you can participate in the decision-making process. So that's part of our advocacy. We have scientific presentations from members of our board or our staff and scientific publications. Those are up on here. And something that's brand new that we're very excited about is we are actually accepting registration for our very first ever Alaskan wildlife expedition. And so we're partnering with Tulango Expeditions to offer wildlife lovers a rare opportunity to backpack with us in the heart of the Brooks Range. And we will actually have one of Alaska Wildlife Alliance's wildlife biologists on that trip to give an inside information on the unique wildlife and some of the concerns in the area. So would you suggest you check it out to see what's been going on with our organization? Next slide, please. I do want to highlight just a couple of some citizen science projects that are going on right now. So one that anyone across the state can do is called Map the Trap. And this is where we have recognized that there's no statewide data collection on incidental trap encounters including information about how many pets get caught in traps, where most pet trappings occur, or areas where trail users are seeing wildlife caught in traps. And so we started this Map the Trap citizen science survey where you can report traps along recreational trails. And we'll get this information to help us understand the dynamics between traps and trail users, and then we'll put it together in a report. And so you can just go to our website, and along the top, you'll see one of the toolbars, it says Map the Trap. If you click on it, it'll take you to this page. And as you scroll down, there'll just be places where you can just fill in boxes to let us know about the date you saw the trap, the type of trap, some details about it. And so anyone in the state can do that. Next slide. For the folks that are in the Cook Inlet region, in the Kenai specifically, our Cook Inlet beluga whale spring monitoring season starts next week. And this is where we've partnered with other organizations and we have formed the Alaska Beluga Whale Monitoring Partnership. And we train up individuals to become citizen scientists to collect data about beluga whales in various regions of Cook Inlet. And Alaska Wildlife Alliance, we run the Kenai and Kasilof sites. So if you're interested in learning how to become a beluga citizen scientist, you can go to akbmp.org. Or if you're in the area and you would just like to get a text message to know when belugas have been seen in the Kenai or Kasilof rivers, you can actually sign up for one of our text alerts. And all you do is text the word beluga to 833-541-0408. And I will put that in the chat a little bit later so you don't have to write it down right now. Next slide. And then just the last thing in our education outreach program is I just want to remind you that we do have some upcoming Wildlife Wednesdays. So the first one on the list is tonight's presentation. But next week, we have a topic on ecoacoustics theory and soundscape ecology in Alaska's wilderness. And that sounds really complex, but kind of the nutshell is that it's talking about the effects of man-made noise on wilderness and wildlife. And the case study is done in the Kenai region. And then next month, we have a topic about hummingbirds, also again, focusing on the Kenai region, but the information will be really interesting statewide. And then, as I said, we are recording this presentation. And so on the right is just some of the presentations from previous Wildlife Wednesdays that we have. And they span from species specific to programs, razor clams to fishers to avian influenza and the Beringia. So check that out. And if there's something that you missed tonight, give us a few days and we'll have this presentation up on our website and you can go back and watch it again. Okay, next slide. And so with no further ado, I want to just jump right in and give our a chance for Sonia Ibarra, Becca Cates, Lia Domke, and Ashley Bolwerk to talk to us and take us on a headfirst dive into fieldwork for sea otters, nearshore communities, and graduate students in Southeast Alaska. Ladies, take it away.
Thanks, Mandy. As Mandy mentioned in our introduction, we are 4 graduate students from UAF, but based in Juneau. And we're going to share some of our stories from the years we've spent doing fieldwork for grad school. So Sonia, you want to hop in?
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. This is Sonia Ibarra, and before we start our presentation today, we want to take a moment to do a land acknowledgement. We'd like to express our deepest gratitude and acknowledgement for the traditional territories of the Indigenous people of the various places that we work, starting with acknowledging Ackwan and the where we currently reside in Juneau, Alaska. And we also want to acknowledge the traditional territories of Kikwan and the Tlingit community of Cake, Hinyaquan and the Tlingit community of Klowak, as well as Craig, and Hadas Klaga, traditional territories of the Haida people in Heidelberg, Alaska. And we want to say as well that we are express and acknowledge their past, present, and future stewardship of these lands. Thank you.
So we're going to do a round of introductions. So my name is Lia Domke, and I am a PhD student at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, based in Juneau. And I'm pictured here holding one of my favorite fish, a buffalo sculpin.
Hi everyone, thanks for attending tonight. My name is Becca Cates, and I am a master's student at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, based in Juneau. And seen here, I am pictured holding a couple of crabs, some red rocks and some Dungeness crab.
Buenas noches. My name is Sonia Ibarra, and I'm a PhD candidate, also at the Juneau Center School of Fisheries. And I'm holding a clam, and I'm covered in mud, one of my favorite things to do.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ashley Bolwerk. I'm a master's student that has the privilege of working in the same lab as all these ladies based in Juneau there. And I'm pictured on Prince of Wales in the Rocky Intertidal, which you'll learn more about as we go here tonight. So the four of us work on a project called APEX, and this is an acronym that actually stands for Apex Predators, Ecosystems, and Community Sustainability. And this is a huge project. The four of us work on it, but there are over a dozen scientists, and we also work with lots of volunteers and community researchers and undergraduate technicians. So the work we're going to present today is really just a very small portion of the overall work that's taken place for this project, but we've selected some of our favorite stories and examples to share with you today. And on the right there is our logo for this project, and it kind of encompasses all the different aspects of what we're trying to study with this overall research project. So I'm going to explain the apex predators piece of that first. As you see in the photo here and in the logo, the apex predator that we're talking about primarily are sea otters. Our study area is primarily on the west coast of Prince of Wales, although we do study in a few other locations in Southeast Alaska. And the history of sea otters is an important backstory to a lot of the work that we do. Sea otters historically lived throughout Southeast Alaska. However, by the early 1900s, all sea otters were removed from the area due to hunting activities. And then sea otters were reintroduced in the late 1960s at several spots throughout Southeast Alaska. Now, from those original reintroduction sites, the sea otter population has expanded both in number and the area where they live. And now, as of the time when we are doing this research, the sea otters inhabit pretty much all of the waters on the west coast of Prince of Wales, which is where most of our work is done. And so this is really important because sea otters are actually voracious predators. Pictured here are just some of the things that they eat. These organisms live throughout the intertidal and into the subtidal. They live on hard surfaces and soft sediment. They kind of live all over the place. And not only do sea otters eat a variety of organisms, but they eat a ton of organisms. They have to have a lot of food in order to keep up their metabolism to stay warm in our cold waters. So this really creates a conflict because sea otters eat so much, and many of these items are actually items that people also enjoy. It means that the sea otters and humans on Prince of Wales are in direct conflict for those resources. And of course, they're also using the same habitats, even if they're not directly competing for resources. The sea otters are using the habitats that people of Prince of Wales have lived and relied on for generations. So that's the backstory and premise for all of the work that we do on this project.
So the E stands for ecosystems, but first I want to talk about the area. So I sort of want to orient you to the area in which we work. So pictured in the map on the left is Prince of Wales, and most of our work happens in southern Southeast Alaska. So we have Prince of Wales here, but we also have some work that happens just north of that in Kupreanof Island. And so this map has different colored shapes or polygons, and the darker areas represent the areas that sea otters were reintroduced to in the late 1960s, like Ashley mentioned. And as they expanded and they grew in population, they moved up and down the coastline of Prince of Wales. And so as the colors get lighter, that's the more recent areas that sea otters have expanded into. And this area where we work, it's composed of a lot of bays and large and small islands and lots of inlets, sort of like the picture on the right here. If we zoom into the circle of the map on the left, we can see two examples of the different type of ecosystems in which we work. So the upper video is actually a video in an eelgrass meadow, also known as crabgrass. And so these vascular plants actually occur in low energy areas, sort of the back of a bay, and they create really great dense habitat for lots of different animals, including crabs, fishes, clams. And so there is sort of a soft sediment area, and they occur right next to shore. And you'll see that right at the end of the video, you can see that it's right next to shore. And usually around these eelgrass beds, either just up on the beach or adjacent to these eelgrass meadows, you'll find clam beds. And that's where Sonia does a lot of her work, or some of her work. The lower photo is an image of a nearshore rocky beach, which is another habitat that we work in. And these are usually in more high energy areas. There's usually lots of kelps and seaweeds around and lots of other organisms. And you can see right behind the people in the picture, we have like large bull kelp and giant kelp that compose the subtidal habitat there.
And then the last part of our acronym APEX is CS, Community Sustainability. And that is basically our efforts, our attempts to understand the community and the human need for marine resources that we may be in direct competition with sea otters for. And so to orient you to some of the communities that we work directly within and with are Klawock and Heidelberg. And so on that left-hand side map, we see that top bubble, that's where Klawock is. And that's where we're based out of for most of a field season when we are on Prince of Wales Island. And that Klawock bubble is pointing to a photo of the long-eared monster, which is part of the totem park in Klawock. And then the bubble below Klawock is where Heidelberg is. And Heidelberg is pointing to a couple of photos, that middle one being the welcome sign into Heidelberg as you enter through the roadway system. And then below that, we have the longhouse that is in Heidelberg that was actually just recently built. And so with community sustainability, it's we're taking steps to understand human and community need for subsistence fisheries in these Tlingit and Haida communities. And so some subsistence fisheries are centered around abalone, which is seen here in a photo, as well as butter clams, along with crabs, sea cucumbers, etc. And we're basically asking, how do sea otters impact this and compete for these resources? And so our end goal is to kind of conduct a highly collaborative approach to work with individuals and local experts in harvest to conduct research that is useful to these communities on Prince of Wales Island so that we can help assist with protecting these subsistence resources for future users.
Throughout the presentation tonight, we sort of have three major vignettes that we're going to follow along. The first one is we're going to share just a little bit about the biology of the work that we do. And this is kind of our specific run through of our research questions, just to give you a feel for why we're out in the field in the first place and what we're doing while we're out there, because that will help you better understand our next two vignettes, which we're going to sort of deviate from the specific research that we do and focus on the communities that we're involved with. And so this will be both sort of our internal field crew community, those who help us actually do the research, and then the communities of Prince of Wales, the people we interact with and live with while we're on Prince of Wales doing our research. And then finally, the third vignette will be sort of the extraneous components of doing field work. We'll tell you all the little ins and outs of how this is actually done, because that's kind of some of the fun aspects of the work that we do. So as we dive into biology here, Becca's going to take it away with her research project.
So my specific research is centered around crabs and kind of asking the general question, what are sea otters doing to crabs that reside in eelgrass beds or crabgrass, those nearshore communities? And so I do this by essentially observing how many sea otters are at a site that is off the west coast of Prince of Wales Island, and then also comparing that to how many crabs are there and the size of those crabs, among other features as well. And then another question that I ask with my research has to do with the seagrass itself. Does it provide protection from sea otters for these crab communities? Is that structure that we see in this photo in the middle and that we saw in that video earlier played, does that actually provide some type of sheltering protection for these crab communities from being preyed upon by sea otters?
I'm more interested in how might shifts in nearshore habitats change what fish live there. So my sort of field work is all focused on the fish and the habitats. So I ask questions about what fish are present in different types of habitats like eelgrass or understory kelp, and how have these fish communities changed over time and in presence or absence of sea otters. And so I do this primarily by beach seining. So the photos on the left, you'll see us setting a beach seine from one of our boats that we've recently named Zostra, which is the scientific name or genus for eelgrass. And then we create this U-Haul shaped seine, and then we pull it into shore. And then in the bottom image on the left there, we've actually taken all of the fish out of the net and put them into buckets with aerators or little bubblers that create bubbles to keep the fish alive. And then we figure out which species are present and we measure them and count them, and then we return them to the habitat that they came out of. We also quantify the habitat. So in the upper image on the right, you can see two undergraduate technicians, Lassie and Bryce, holding up a piece of kelp that we found in from one of our beach seines. And so we quantify how much kelp is there, what kinds, and we also do that with eelgrass. And in these understory kelp habitats and in eelgrass habitats, these nearshore habitats, they're really important for lots of different fish species, like the juvenile rockfish in the middle image, and also forage fishes like the sand lance that you see in the bottom video there. And salmon are also known to pass through these habitats. So my question definitely revolves around the fish.
This is Ashley again. I study rocky beaches within our project umbrella, and I have sort of two main focuses with this work. As you look at the 4 photos on the slide here, hopefully you recognize that each of these beaches looks quite different from the others. This is an intertidal, these are all intertidal sites that I have used to look at what influences the rocky beaches. And what I mean by that is we're looking at how the animals and plants that live on the beach change from beach to beach, and trying to understand what the forces are that cause those changes in the community of organisms. So sea otters is one of the factors that we look at, trying to determine if the time that sea otters have been in an area drastically shifts how the ecosystem looks, or whether it's other factors about the beach that are more important in determining what the community of organisms that live there is going to look like. In addition to sort of this broad ecosystem view of organisms on rocky beaches, I was able to partner with the community of Heidelberg and the Heidelberg Cooperative Association, which is the tribal entity, to help understand what's going on with abalone at their traditional harvest sites. So the video here is of an abalone underwater at one of our sites. This is a species that many people love to eat, and it's also a species that they've noticed declining really drastically over the past decades. Abalone happens to be one of sea otter's favorite meals. And so that, of course, is concerning as sea otters come back to an area that they're also seeing a decline in abalone. But there's a long history of both subsistence harvest, and there was a big commercial harvest at one point as well in the past. So we were able to go out to traditional harvest sites by partnering with local harvesters, like the one on the bottom left here, to help learn more about what they've seen over the past decades at their traditional harvest sites, and to collect the in situ data of how many abalone are there and how big they are, to try to understand more about what's happening with their abalone.
Hi everyone, this is Sonia again. So for my research, I looked at how humans and sea otters are competing for the same shellfish species. So we talked about clams and crab, and I mostly focus on clams. And what I did for this work was to weave together observations from local food harvest experts, so people that are on the land and on the water very often and have a long history of harvesting resources, and then coupling that information with clam surveys as a way to measure the changes that are going on to these resources based on how long sea otters have been at these locations, as well as whether they're high or low use harvest sites by people. And because I am towards the end of the work, I wanted to share some of the key findings from this work that was based on both Prince of Wales Island as well as Kupernup Island. And what harvest experts from Heidelberg, Craig, Kloak, and Cake said was that there was declines in shellfish availability and abundance, and we verified these with clam surveys. And there was smaller shellfish, and this resulted in limited access to shellfish as compared to the past at locations close to sea otters.
With that, we're going to dive into our next vignette and look at sort of the community aspects of our work. As I mentioned earlier, this has sort of two main focuses. First, we're going to talk a little bit about sort of our internal community that we're able to create through our extensive amount of time that we spend together and doing research on Prince Wales. And then we're going to shift into talking about the community within which we work, as in the greater community of Prince of Wales and Kupernup.
One of our communities that we end up creating during the field season is actually our own field crew. Over the years, we've had different teams of different sizes, but they have all been integral for the success of this research. We end up living together from between 1 month to 4 months in the summer. So there's a lot of bonding that happens. We often recruit undergraduates studying at UAS, University of Alaska Southeast, or University of Alaska Fairbanks to join us in the field. And we've even also worked with high school students. So if you add together sleep deprivations from early mornings that are required to catch the tides, the low tides, usually when we work, we end up getting pretty goofy. We have laugh attacks at random times. Ashley often would cry from laugh attacks at dinner. Sometimes we'd forget important equipment at home. Sometimes we'd go north on the road system instead of south. And somehow each year we managed to get the work done. So these are just a few of the photos of different members from the field teams throughout the years. And this is by no means everyone. We didn't have enough space on this slide for that. But in the middle photo, on the middle left, you see a group of us looking at clams. And so we're doing what I call clam forensics, and we're trying to figure out what ate that clam. We also do a lot of species ID. So Sarah in the lower left-hand photo is holding up a bunch of snails that we had a lot of trouble trying to figure out what they were. And a lot of our field crew get really into the animals that we work with. So to the right of that, Kathy has an idatea, which is essentially a type of marine bug, on her nose that she found, I think, during a seagrass survey. And we have Adri on the far right holding up a fish that we caught in a seine net. And man, that's a pretty great smile for a little fish. We also pull crab pots. And so we have Mark in the upper right-hand corner pulling up a crab pot. And we have Kobe in the lower middle, really enthusiastic about the field day. And then in the middle photo on the right, we have Joe, Sonia, Sarah, and Shawan after. This is post-field work. You can tell because none of them have mud on them. But our field crew is really just a great part of being able to go out in the field and being able to meet different people and sort of talk about what our science is, or what our research is, and get to engage with all of these different people.
And another aspect of our field crew community is Earthwatch. So for those of you that haven't heard of Earthwatch before, it's this environmental nonprofit that you can all visit their website, and with any spare time, vacation time, you can sign up and you can be paired with a trip all across the globe, and you can spend your vacation time working for up to 10 days on a research project. And so we did this from 2017 through 2019, where we had citizen scientists come and live with us for 10 days at a time. And so it became a pretty formative experience for our time in the field for almost all of us. And it was very fun and very challenging at times too. And these Earthwatch volunteers helped us accomplish things that we never could have by ourselves, because, you know, we needed their energy, we needed their spirit, and we needed their hands. And we really put them through the Southeast Alaska ringer when they arrived on Prince of Wales. We gave them the gear and the necessary information that they needed. But then after that, they were treated just like part of the field crew. And they ended up handling so much. Basically did everything for us along with us, besides handling the vessels and the vehicles. So in the right-hand photo, we have a volunteer that helped us with the sea otter survey, where we're going around our sites and literally counting sea otters and trying not to get seasick. And then in the middle two photos, we have two volunteers who are helping us with Ashley's work in the Rocky Intertidal. And then on the far left side, we have a team. So usually two of the teams that visited us throughout the field season were composed of teenagers. And so that brought a whole nother level of challenges and spirit to our field team that we really did appreciate. And so seen here was some teenagers that helped us lead an impromptu yoga session when we had a rare moment to relax a little bit.
So next we're gonna shift from talking about our internal field crew to talking about the Prince of Wales community, which we all feel incredibly lucky to have been able to work with.
So the amazing thing about working and having the opportunity to live on Prince of Wales Island is that we got to observe the deep and profound connections that people have to the land, to the water, to the resources and animals of these places. And these relationships for people and to their environment ranges a whole gamut. And so here we have Jennifer Mooney from Heidelberg, who is putting up subsistence foods or wild foods, in this case, sockeye salmon, that she's putting up not just for her family, but her extended family, as well as families beyond Prince of Wales, all the way down to Haida Gwaii in British Columbia. We also have community members that have businesses that rely on the environment of this island. So here we have oyster farmers that have their product in the water and rely on this environment. And then there's also a fleet of commercial harvesters, whether that be for salmon or dive fisheries or other resources. In all of these places, on Prince of Wales Island, we have subsistence harvesters, recreational harvesters, and commercial harvesters. And while they have different relationships to the resources of this place, what is common among all of them is that these important resources and the health of these places are very important. And here we have a picture of the Heidelberg Gym, where various dancers are gathered together to celebrate their culture, celebrate their connection to the land, etc. And on Prince of Wales Island, there's 4 tribes. Here we have community members in Heidelberg. They're represented by the Heidelberg Cooperative Association. The tribe in Craig is the Craig Tribal Association. And in Klawock, it's a Klawock Cooperative Association. And Kasan is the organized village of Kasan. And so there's communities from all different cultural groups that reside on this island and have a rich and deep connection to these places, as well as the resources.
In addition to being able to regularly talk with all of the folks that Sonia just introduced you to on Prince of Wales, as far as revolving around our research, we also try to go to Prince of Wales in the off season. During the field season, you know, we're there for 1 to 4 months, but we're so busy often that aside from, you know, getting stopped on the dock by interested commercial fishermen or, you know, local subsistence users and ask questions about our research, we don't get a lot of time to talk to the community during the field season. And so each year we try to go to Prince of Wales in the off season, which usually happens in early spring, to connect with all of our different contacts there, make sure to connect when we can with the tribal councils and other folks just at the grocery store, for instance. But one of my favorite parts about our winter trip to Prince of Wales is that we also try to go to the schools and communicate our research to the kids at the various different schools on Prince of Wales. So the picture here is just one example of us doing this. This is a kindergarten class in Craig, actually. And here we have the students that are kind of mimicking a photo you saw earlier of one of our Earth Watchers doing a sea otter survey with their binoculars up to their eyes. And we have one student who's actively foraging as our sea otter in that tote. There are several different prey item cards, and she's going to pull out a food item. And the rest of us are going to try to watch and see if we can identify what the sea otter is eating. This is another part of our research that another graduate student does. And we try to take the research and actually adapt it for the classroom so the students get a firsthand look at what this type of research looks like. So we make one trip every year and try to hit as many classrooms as we can in between all of our other commitments that week to connect with the community. But it's a really important part of being able to connect with folks during the off season that we aren't able to during the field season. And I wanted to include this last photo here just because I think it really exemplifies how amazing the people of Prince of Wales are and how we all have been really lucky to live and work among the people who live there year round. One day we drove down to Heidelberg, which is about an hour and a half from our home stop, and our car broke down because the key snapped off in the ignition, and it was too short for us to be able to start it. And so this was sort of a friend of a friend who dropped everything and spent 2 hours getting our car operational so we could drive home, and expected absolutely nothing from us in return. And I can't tell you how many similar encounters we've had with people who bring you tea when you're sick, and bring you birthday cake when you're the only one in the who's living in a small community. And so it's just a really amazing place of really beautiful people. And our final vignette that we're going to dive into is some of the extra components of how we do field work on Prince of Wales. And so within this vignette, we have sort of a few different topics we're going to cover. We're going to touch on some of the logistics and planning that goes into such a huge field operation. We're going to talk about the reality of field work, which really involves a lot of different bloopers. And finally, we're going to talk about the beauty of our field work and sort of our ability to have been there to do field work.
So by now, you might be wondering, well, how do you get all of your field crew and all of your crew required for science from Juneau to Prince of Wales to beautiful eelgrass beds like this one here? Well, it takes a lot of prep work ahead of time. One of the first things we do is we get together all of the scientific gear that we'll need for the research that's happening on the island that summer. And pictured on the far left is Wendell, a former PhD student, now doctor, wrapped up in a seine net that he used for a lot of his research, and also the seine net that I now use. We also make sure that we go shopping and go to Costco before we go, and make sure that we've got a lot of good food and great snacks to fuel everyone. And I like to make sure that we have a lot of coconut milk, because nothing is better after a cold day in the field than a nice hot curry. And it's super quick to make. So when you're hungry at like 5 p.m., it's totally reasonable to whip out really quick. And two, it feeds a lot of people. And as you might have sort of realized over the course of our stories, we often have a lot of people doing the work. And the last thing we make sure we have all ready to go and operational is all of our safety gear, because we get to the island by land, sea, and air, I like to say. So sometimes we'll fly people down on seaplanes to get to Prince of Wales. The land option I call is how we send all of our land vehicles. So the packed up truck in the upper image full of food, and then another vehicle in the lower image there full of lots of gear and personal gear and field gear. And we send that usually with our smaller 16 to 18 foot boat on Alaska Marine Highway to Ketchikan, and then on Inter-Island Ferry Authority across the way to Prince of Wales. And then the last bit of our team usually comes on Ishkeen, which is our 27 foot North River pictured in the photo, the upper left photo. And that's Courtney, Ginny, and Ashley getting ready to take Ishkeen from Juneau on the 12-hour trek to get it to Kloak. And so that requires a lot of good snacks. Snacks are a big theme for the field work, multiple drivers, and maybe a couple naps on the way down. So once we're on the island, the logistics and the planning literally never ends. In our largest field crew, we had 3 boats going out every day during the low tide cycle, which usually lasts about 10 days with 4 to 6 days in between the tide cycles. And so to give you an idea of what a day in the life would look like, imagine this hypothetical math problem. So bear with me, it's not too complicated. But if we have a low tide of -1 foot at 7:30, and we know we want to get to the site at 6 a.m. when the tide is 0, when we want to be able to start doing our work, and we know that it takes 2 hours driving / boating to get to the site, so an hour and a half of driving and maybe a half an hour of boating. That means that if you throw in a half an hour of time just for luck and for a good buffer, you're leaving the house at 3:30 in the morning, which means at minimum, you have to wake up at 3 a.m. So when I say a 5 p.m. dinner, I mean a 5 p.m. dinner and a strict 7 p.m. bedtime for me at least. But we end up catching really great sunrises like this one here pictured on the left as we're boating to one of our sites. And it also means we end up taking a lot of naps. So I normally drove in the morning because for whatever reason, I was awake at 3 a.m. And so I'd require that my co-pilot also be awake, but everyone else would be sleeping, just like Wendell in the upper picture on the right here. And then once we get to the sites, the way we get to and from our big boat to land, we get pretty creative with. So we have Sarah in the lower image on the right on the pizza slice of science inflatable using a stadia rod, so one of the pieces of equipment that we measure things with, to paddle back out to the boat. We end up getting pretty creative. So the next part of the next vignette is actually some of the bloopers and the reality of all of the field work that we do. So when we're on the field, we end up sampling pretty much everywhere all the time. Sometimes we're sampling from the back of Ishkeen, our larger boat, like Tiff and Nicole are doing in the upper image on the left. So they're taking water samples and other oceanographic information. We sample from our smaller boat, like the middle image on the top middle, setting our seine net. We're often counting eelgrass density, so the number of eelgrass plants in a certain area. And we do that using dry suits like Becca's wearing in the image in the top right and in waders. And sometimes we snorkel to do the work like Wendell in the middle, the lower middle photo. But sometimes we have to get really creative with how we do our work. So we have Ginny in the lower left-hand photo, who's actually our supervisor. And she is trying to get the last bit of information off the very end of the transect for one of Ashley's sites. And she is standing on a paddleboard, half on the paddleboard, half on land, and essentially trying to avoid what I call a marine cliff to get the data. And sometimes we have visitors out in the field with us. So on the lower image on the right, we have Xena, our science dog, who doesn't like mud.
And so while a lot of that might seem really high profile, highbrow science to you all, the reality of fieldwork is that there's actually a lot of bloopers and that we are constantly dealing with different scenarios, just trying to manage the field season and get through it so that we can get the data. And we do it with a little bit of fun too. But seen here is a photo of Lia in one of our vans, and you might spend literally hours packing these vans so that nothing moves around and that really fragile gear is kept safe, but inevitably that's what happens anyway. You hit a bump and a good couple hundred of sample vials go tumbling right out of the van. Or the nature of working in the intertidal is that it's really muddy. And so despite your best efforts to keep the gear clean or somewhat clean even, so that you don't have to spend hours cleaning it later, it's just not gonna happen some days. And so seen here is me and Lia in the Sea Weasel, one of our vessels, after a particularly muddy day in the intertidal. Or sometimes when you're setting a seine from the Sea Weasel, from the vessel, it might just go really, really terribly wrong. And if you're super dedicated like Lia is, you might fortunately already have your dry suit on and jump in after the seine, trying to save it with your own hands while everyone else just kind of watches and lets it go. Or sometimes your vessel might just attempt to sink. And so keyword there, attempt to sink, because this is a Sea Weasel and it was tied up to a larger vessel overnight. And when we woke up, this is how we found it. It was, as you can see, as that gas jug is kind of floating in the back there, it had taken on quite a bit of water, but since it was tied up, it didn't actually sink all the way. And safe to say that that vessel retired at the end of the 2019 field season. And the other reality of fieldwork is that you are constantly taking naps, as Lia kind of mentioned earlier. Anywhere, any place, anytime that you are not working, you are probably napping. And so seen here is a volunteer who found that the back of the boat was somewhat of a good place to take a nap until she got pummeled by seawater. And here I was actually successful taking a nap. It's not too shabby of a place when you have Xena the science dog to cuddle with you and keep you warm. Or maybe you're like Mark and you can literally take a nap on the drop of a dime, any place, anytime, anywhere.
And with that, we are going to jump into some of the beauty of the work that we do. So one of the most amazing things about being a graduate student tasked with spending months on end in an amazing place and learning about that ecosystem is that you literally spend days and days of your time in these ecosystems, and you learn so much about them that others might kind of just pass by. For example, sometimes you see really tiny things that you would never see otherwise. So here we have two itty bitty critters that we found in our sampling efforts. The one on the left is a sea cucumber. These guys can be over a foot long when they're fully grown. So that one on the tip of my finger there is quite itty bitty and normally would be overlooked if I was just walking the beach. But because I spent my days staring 6 inches away from a rock, I saw lots of little critters like this. And the photo on the right is actually an itty bitty little fish. This is a type of sculpin. I couldn't tell you what type because it's so tiny that we don't even try to identify this anymore. You probably would have to put it under a microscope to be able to tell it apart from all the other species. But again, we found this in a seine net for the work like Lia does. And so it's on a giant net, but you're looking so close for it that you're able to find these itty bitty things. In addition to tiny things, you also find some really oddballs. The video we're going to watch here is actually of some fish called grunt sculpins. These are about the size of your fingernail. There are 4 of them in this little viewer. And one day as we were beach sailing, we just happened to find these itty bitty guys in our net. And as you can see here, they're quite a weird looking little fish, but they happen to be a crew favorite of ours. We really enjoy finding them because they're so different and they're just really cute the way they flutter around. And in addition to odd fish, we tend to see oddballs of all sorts. Here are 2 examples of sort of odd invertebrates that we found. The one on the left is a limpet species. Those little white shells are actually attached to the rock there because the tide is out, but you can see that they've actually eaten away a depression in the rock for them to live in. So that's a really odd trait of an invertebrate, is that they actually sort of scour out a new home for them in the rock. And on the right-hand side, those things that kind of look like dinosaur toes, those are actually gooseneck barnacles. And so these are an organism that lives on some heavily wave-exposed rocky beaches of Prince of Wales, and are just such a unique organism. You know, if you asked a kid to draw a critter, you might end up with something along these lines, a combination of different critter types. And then in addition to those invertebrates, I wanted to show just one example of some really interesting algae that we've come across in our work. The one that takes up most of this photo here is called dead man's fingers. It's really squishy. If you broke into it, it kind of looks like Jello, but on the outside, it sort of has this really soft, velvety texture. So it's a really odd type of algae to come across, and some beaches have tons of it, and others there isn't any at all. So just a really fun one that we were able to encounter in some of this work. Prince of Wales is also really unique in that the organisms have different habitats that they're able to use. This photo is actually two different organisms living together. Hopefully you can see the little crab claw that's just barely poking out of this cave here. That's a little intertidal crab, and it is living inside of a cave made of another animal. This is called a Bryozoan. And so the orange stuff all over it is this colonial animal, actually. And so they're living together in this really unique way. And again, you know, we would have totally missed this if we were just walking by on the beach, but because we're crawling around on hands and knees and really tasked with trying to understand how life lives there, we come across these really unique situations. And another way that Prince of Wales has some really cool habitat is that Prince of Wales has a large amount of karst limestone, which is pictured in both of these photos here, and which is fairly unique for Southeast Alaska. Limestone is something that, you know, I grew up with in the Midwest and never expected to see here in Southeast. But it makes these really amazing formations. So on the left here, Lia is actually emerging from an intertidal cave, that sort of tunnel that was part of our survey area. And there's all kinds of really cool organisms living in there. And on the right, this tide pool is sort of made into almost a bathtub type shape in this depression in the limestone. And so Kathy's exploring the tide pool with her waders on there knee deep, enjoying the organisms that live in this really cool tide pool. And as was already mentioned, just the nature of our work being tide dependent. Most of the tides in the summer are early morning tides when they're really good low tides. And so we get to see the sunrise so many days, of course, only when it's sunny in Southeast Alaska, but we've had some great luck in our years on Prince of Wales to see some pretty epic sunrises as we head out to work for the day.
And in addition to seeing these amazing sunrises and all these amazing creatures and landforms, because of the nature of the work that we do, whether it be working with community members such as Joe here from Heidelberg, or through informal conversations at the dock, as was previously shared, we have this unique opportunity to see the world through their lenses. And Joe is holding up some cockles here. And it's just been such an amazing opportunity to not just view this unique island, Prince of Wales, as well as Kupreanof through the eyes of researchers, but also the eyes of community members. And here's a picture of Joe and Sarah on the left from Heidelberg, and on the right, the IGAC coordinator and Cake, and having the opportunity to work closely together with community members, so right next to each other, has, in the work that we've done, given us a really unique opportunity to uncover some of the things that we might not have realized that were important. So it's been extremely meaningful to work together side by side. And in addition to working together, we also play together. And so on the left-hand picture is a picture of Joe and Sarah that are getting ready to put some bait on a skate for halibut that was then used to for us to have some fresh food, but also to share with elders in the community. And on the right-hand side is a picture of Sarah and Shawan, and they are braiding the intestines of a seal. And this is a really delicious food that I had the honor to taste, as well as we were able to share this with community members. So because of the relationships that we've built, and the people that have been involved either directly in the research or, as Ashley shared, helping us out when we're stuck with a broke down car, we've had just such an amazing opportunity to experience unique things and learn as well. And this is a picture of Joe and Sarah on the left. I'm in the middle. And we have the Cake ICAT coordinator on the right-hand side. And by working together side by side, whether it's informal or formal, this has created a really unique opportunity as researchers to see the world in a different lens, as well as making our work meaningful to the communities that we work with, and just doing better research in general, not coming with our own ideas of what is the right way to view the world or how to count and measure things, but working side by side with communities to become better researchers.
And with that, we would really like to thank you all for coming to our presentation tonight. And we'd like to thank the folks at the Alaska Wildlife Alliance, because this is something we really enjoy doing. Is, you know, usually as graduate students, we're asked to give a research talk, and we do lots of, you know, presentations and paper writing and things like that. But we all are, you know, we came to graduate school to do research, but really what makes graduate school so wonderful and so fun is all of the extra parts of the research and sort of the environment there. And so we really appreciate you tuning in and letting us share these stories that are so meaningful to us and has been such a huge part of our lives. So thank you all so much for that. And I wanted to also point out, we put our contact info on here if you want to learn more about the research that we're doing. As I mentioned, we're just 4 of over a dozen researchers that have worked on this project throughout the years. And if you want to find out more about what we are up to currently and have been up to in the past, you can reach us at any of the info listed there. So thank you all so much.
And I just want to thank you as well. But before I do that, now's your chance to go ahead, and if you have any questions, type them in the chat. Please make sure that you send them to me. That way I have a record of them and I can share them with our speakers. I'm Mandy. And so while you're taking your time to go ahead and type your chat questions, I just want to thank our speakers, you know, Becca, Lia, Sonia, Ashley, so much for the time it took to develop and give this presentation to us tonight. We're very appreciative of that. We also want to thank everyone who participated in the presentation tonight. It means that you care about Alaska's wildlife, and that's very important. And then I also just want to thank all of our current AWA members. Your donations has actually made this program possible. And being a nonprofit, I need to put in a quick plug that if you do want to help us safeguard the future of Alaska's wildlife and keep programs such as our Wildlife Wednesdays from going extinct, we would ask that you please consider becoming a member of AWA or supporting us through one of our partners. We are a registered charity with Pick, Click, Give, with Amazon Smile, the Roundup app. If you're a federal or military member, through the Combined Federal Campaign, the CFC, and then also Bonfire, they're our official merchandiser. So if you want to get any AWA swag, they donate a portion of those proceeds to us. So, okay, now I'm seeing some questions come in. And so here we go. If I wanted to do a home study of how different cold water fish environments work by having a personal aquarium, what would you recommend be a good species to use?
Well, I'll jump in and see if I can answer this initially, just because I study the fish. I will acknowledge that I have never had an aquarium, so I know that there's a lot of work and specialty involved in setting up aquariums, in particular saltwater aquariums. I'm pretty sure they're pretty different than freshwater. And I think the added complication is you're interested in cold water fish environments, but I think it could be worthwhile. I would first recommend reaching out to someone you know that has a cold water aquarium. I know that in Juneau, DiePack has one that they maintain, and NOAA out at Lena also has a cold water aquarium. I also want to say that marine ecosystems, and in particular the nearshore, are extremely complex, and like most of the time when I'm doing my work, I'm like, oh, I'm barely scratching the surface. Like I need to know all of these other things that I just don't know, like how much water movement is happening, like why is this eelgrass bed so different than this other one? Same with the nearshore rocky habitats. So with all of those caveats, I would say sculpin are like pretty robust fish. They handle, I think, a lot of different environments. They will live in tide pools, and so they can handle being, you know, sort of moved around. They're in rocky habitats, and when we're working with the fish, they tend to fare really well, and I think they eat a lot of stuff too. Like they'll eat other fish, and I don't want to take too much time on this topic, but yeah, sculpins would be where I personally would start.
Great, thank you. Another question we have is, how does PSP affect the otters? Good question.
Sonia, do you want to jump in on this one, or do you want me to cover it?
Why don't you start and then I'll add on if I think of any.
Okay. So I guess I would say that there's been some interesting research done in sort of aquarium and captive otters. And so they've looked at sea otters and whether they eat PSP or really hot clams with PSP. And so what they find is often sea otters will actually avoid eating those clams, or they'll kind of take off. Often the end of the siphon is sort of the most toxic part, and so they'll take that off, and so they kind of adapt their behavior. I don't know that there's been a lot of research done in wild otters to know exactly how much they're impacted by it, and so this is where, Sonia, if you know of firsthand accounts, this would be great for you to jump in.
Mm-hmm. So there was a previous graduate student that is in the same lab that we're in with Dr. Ginny Ecker, and his name is, he has graduated. His name is Dr. Zach Hoyt, and he tagged some sea otters in the Cake area. And in tagging them, they also took vital information like blood work from these sea otters. And of the sea otters that were tagged that had radio collars, and they took blood work from them, they found that PSP was present in the sea otter blood. And I don't know the exact levels, whether those were high enough levels that would be toxic to humans, for example, but they did detect it. And then from accounts from folks in Cake, they shared an oral history account where they said that while sea otters have been eaten in the past, that they're not eaten commonly because of the fear of if they might have PSP and accumulating that as a human consumer. And also folks have shared that unlike a sea otter has hardly any fat. And so they're not rich and juicy, and they're also covered in scent glands. And so if you were to eat a sea otter, you would want to meticulously remove all of those scent glands, otherwise the meat will smell within a half hour. So a little extra information than PSP.
Yeah, thanks, ladies. That was really interesting. It's really neat to know that sea otters kind of have adapted a little bit and they can tell somehow and adjust. Okay, another question came in. Do you go back to the communities to share with them the results and review your findings before publishing?
I think this answer is a little different for each of us. I know, so I'll kind of just share my own take on this. So yeah, I'm definitely trying to go back to the community and share the results. COVID has really thrown a wrench in our ability to go back to the community safely and share the work that we've been doing. But the ultimate goal, especially for the work that I did on Abalone, is to talk to the community and the tribal council and the harvesters that I worked with before any of that information is published. So I'll let others jump in on their thoughts.
I'll ahead and jump in. This is Sonia. Just to piggyback on what Ashley says, is we have this huge group of, over a dozen researchers, and there's a whole spectrum of folks, whether as Ashley shares her intention to come back to communities, and that's another intention of mine as well. And COVID definitely has affected that. So once things are better, one of the goals that I have is to, because I did a lot of interviews for my work, is to bring back the recordings as well as the transcriptions from the interviews that I did, and also the data from the clam surveys. And I really do appreciate this question, because I feel like there's a wave of change coming where researchers are realizing that we need to do more than share our work through the traditional venues such as talks or research papers, that we need to think beyond that and work closely, if we work with communities, to figure out what might be the best way to bring this home. Ashley has a lot of experience doing and Lia and Becca doing stuff at the schools. And so that could be a potential venue. And so one of my goals is to go back to each community that I worked with and to figure out, how can I bring this information back home in a meaningful way that benefits the community.
I think that's really fantastic. And I was at a scientific conference a few years ago, and one of the keynote speakers was talking about the concept of, I believe she called it parachute research, where researchers just kind of drop in, do their thing, drop out, and the community never gets to know what happened. So I think it's really great that you're incorporating that feedback into your programs. I'm not seeing any more questions right now, so I'll give it just another minute, but I just want to say, despite all the mud and the long days, it looked like you had a lot of fun doing your research, and I really love the ecosystem-based approach to your work, from the habitats to the animals to the human communities. I think it's really fantastic. And given how interconnected everything is, it's really challenging that a lot of managers manage for just one component. And I think it really misses a lot. And managing for biodiversity and the interconnected of it is really how we're going to build healthy ecosystems. So, okay, so we do have a question. And I think this might be a misunderstanding. So the question is, how do I find you on Amazon Smile, not finding Apex? So it's Alaska Wildlife Alliance is on Amazon Smile. So we're the nonprofit organization hosting our speakers tonight, and our speakers are part of the Apex program. So I hope that answers that for you. But if you're interested in finding us on Amazon Smile, you just go to smile.amazon.com, and under the charities, look for Alaska Wildlife Alliance. So thank you. And unless there's no other questions, just one final thank you to our speakers, to our attendees. And for those of you who are joining us, we would love to just learn where you're joining us from. We get surprised how far our Wildlife Wednesdays go sometimes. Not only the lower 48, but sometimes some international. So we love just to see where folks are joining us from. And we will share any kudos that you put into the chat with our speakers. So please tell them thank you and what an amazing job they did before you sign off. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having us, Mandy. This was a lot of fun.